now we're getting into negotiation, okay? So this is where you might want to take some notes. And when I was talking with Maureen, she had mentioned that I think some of the folks, when they're talking about mask mandates and they're going to the meetings and they're expressing themselves, you know, it could probably be done in a little bit better of a manner. You know, there's a way to play the game, right? We want to play that linguistic game. We want to play that game that's you know, on the surface, you don't really see it. But okay, so let's talk about the art of negotiation, okay? The art of letting the other person have your way. Now, how do we do that? What we do is we create the illusion of control, okay? So in a conversation, who is controlling the conversation? Let me ask you a question. Raise your hand if you think the person talking is controlling the conversation. And then raise your hand if you think the person listening is controlling the conversation. Right, there's a lot of smart people in this room. Wow,
That's all we let in here.
I'm impressed. I love that. So yes, so you're absolutely right. If you're listening, you're the one in control because you're crafting. First, it goes back to Stephen Covey, right? You want to think the 7 habits of highly effective people, right? We want to make sure we're listening, not with the intent to reply, but we're listening, and not letting that voice inside our head start formulating our answer yet. We want to try to listen and be empathetic. Okay, so the more that we can be empathetic, and I know some people are saying, well, how can you be empathetic about critical race theory or all these different things, right? So what you have to do is just stay with me here. So let's start off with, we're going to go through some different strategies and tactics, okay? So the tactics are, there's a lot of strategies and tactics I'm going to go through, but number one is when you smile, by simply smiling, did you know that studies show you're 31% smarter when you're smiling? So even if you can't stand the person or if you're in a bad mood and you want to smile, because what that's going to do is it's going to initiate you're going to be 31% smarter when you're in a positive state, right? So you're going to create more of a collaborative environment. So it's going to be a little bit more of a collaborative opportunity for that person to understand where you're coming from. And it's the law of reciprocation. If I smile at you, there's a pretty good chance you're going to smile at me back. Even if you're walking on the street, so smiling will go a long ways, because when you're in negotiation, the last thing you want is 2 bulldogs butting heads, right? That's the last thing you want. You're not going to get anywhere with that, okay? So a great quote I love from the book, in times of difficulty, we don't rise to the occasion, we fall to our greatest level of preparation, right? And that's like with anything in life, okay? So if we're prepared and we go in there with our notes and we go in there with our talking points, and what Chris talks about in his book is he calls a negotiation one sheet. Okay, so you're going to have a one sheet that's written down. You're going to talk about your labels, your mirrors, and your different strategies. So I'll go through labels and mirrors here in a minute. All right. So and the FBI, by the way, they use 3 to 5 listeners behind the scenes. So anytime there's a bank robbery or a hostage situation, there's not just one person talking to the folks on the inside. There's 3 to 5 people listening because they're looking for cues and tells and little bits of information that may not pass that first person. It might just blow past that first person. But this is a really big point, is listening, not with the intent to reply, but also listening as an empathetic, right? So the more that we can have empathy, we want to have empathy, and we want to develop our listening skills, our process, and we want to be able to process information quickly. If we can process information quickly, and then we can determine and summarize our next move. And I'm going to talk about labels. I'm going to talk about mirrors. Of course, silence is a big part. You ever been buying a car? Sometimes in the dealership will just kind of sit back and let you kind of stew on the payment or whatever it is that So that's silence is our friend in a lot of cases. And we want to use what he calls calibrated questions. So calibrated questions, kind of getting a metaphor or an analogy to when you're sighting in your gun, you're calibrating the sights, right? You're looking at the target, you're calibrating that gun. So I'm using questions as I'm talking to my counterpart. And I'm designing the dialogue in my head where I want them to go. Does that make sense? You see what I'm saying? All right, so it kind of comes back to also how do we act as humans, right? A lot of people think they're rational and they make rational decisions. Well, one of the things that we talk about in the book is that we are all irrational. As much as we think we are rational, it's part of our brain. It's part of our systems in our brain, okay? So we're irrational and we're emotional. That's the problem. And there's also old school negotiation strategies, which they would teach at Harvard, versus tactical strategies that worked at FBI. So when you think about different types of strategies and you think about the way that the brain works, the old school method would be, oh, have you ever heard this one? You got to separate the person from the problem, right? That's the old way of trying to deal in negotiations. How can you separate the person from the problem when their emotions are the problem, right? So a lot of times when we think about altercations we've had in our past, it's been because we've had problems separating our emotions. And how can we be great negotiators if we can't control our own emotions, right? How can we expect to change someone's opinion and bring them to our side of the aisle if we can't control our emotions, right? So we want to be able to reach into their brain and kind of flip a switch with certain words and some strategies and tactics that I'm going to talk about. And there's some things that are almost like Jedi mind tricks.